Hey guys, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology bringing you another chart reading. And today I am going to be talking about the chart of Matt Lauer. If you want to follow along, he was born on December 30th, 1957 in New York, New York. We don't have his birth time, so we're working with a solar chart, but we know he has a sun at 8 degrees Capricorn, and his moon was definitely in the sign of Aries, no matter what time he was born that day. And most likely the later degrees, 17, 18 or higher. So the first thing I'm wanting to talk about is the fact that, just like I was mentioning in my last chart reading of Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer also has the Mars squared Pluto in his chart. This is the fourth man now, because we talked about it with Harvey Weinstein, with Kevin Spacey, with Charlie Rose, and now also with Matt Lauer has a Mars squared Pluto in his chart. And again, we talked about how that has to do with control, with power, with sexuality. So it's just fascinating to me that all four of these charts have that pattern in it. Now, Matt's is Mars at 5 degrees Sagittarius and Pluto at 2 degrees Virgo. And I wanted to read first a little bit from a book called Aspects in Astrology by Sue Tompkins. And she's a well-respected astrologer. She's written this book about natal aspects. And I just wanted to read a little bit about it to give you an idea of what this Mars-Pluto energy is about, because it's definitely the impetus or the source of what has been going on with all of these men and their charts. So she says Mars-Pluto anger, because Mars again is our male principle, it's our drive, you know, and Pluto is our ability to transform. But if the energies are not working together, it can turn into this kind of like real intense energy that gets expressed in very distorted ways. So she says Mars-Pluto anger is not so much anger as rage, the rage of the screaming infant who for whatever reason was too frightened to get angry when young. And the anger that was never discharged settles and becomes congealed. In childhood, there was usually a lot of free-floating rage around, commonly with sexual roots. In any event, such feelings were often unconscious or largely unexpressed. Mars and Pluto together are usually thought of as the significators of rape, and one thinks of rape in the sexual sense, which one would apply here, as Mars-Pluto is a common contact in the charts of both the raped and the rapist. But the real meaning of the word is to take by force, and this can be viewed in a variety of contexts. Those with Mars-Pluto contexts know all about taking by force. That's usually a quality of the environment in which they were raised. Succumbing to such behaviors themselves is not the usual manifestation, but it can happen, and it is what one might expect to happen to any child who has continually felt thwarted and powerless and angry. The idea of taking by force and resisting pressure from outside can be positively or negatively used. As Stephen Arroyo says, there's a compulsive drive for power with these aspects. Such power can provide the strength out of which great things are made and out of which great personal transformation occurs, but it can also be at the root of great cruelty and violence. So that is the main dynamic going on in the charts of all of these men. And I wanted to also mention something, because you can find out more about Matt Lauer's wife, because a while back in 2006 she reportedly filed for divorce, and what she said was in her I guess divorce papers that he was extremely controlling and accused him of cruel and inhumane acts. and that he had put her physical and mental well-being in danger. And then the divorce papers were reportedly withdrawn 3 weeks after they were filed. So there was a little glimpse of that energy playing out in his personal relationship with his wife. Now, it's also known that, well, from what I've been reading, I can't say I know this for sure, but it's being reported that, infidelity was common with him, and kind of everybody sort of knew about it. But what people didn't know about was this sort of like, this more of this taking by force kind of thing. And that's what's happening. These women are coming out and they're saying, he basically sexually assaulted me, and that's what they're claiming. So that's the Mars squared Pluto energy in his chart. Obviously, it has also played out in the positive way, where there's been a lot of ability to, create. That's what Pluto can be too. It can be a lot of power to create, and combined with Mars, which is our drive, it can really give us drive to, succeed and accomplish quite a bit. And he certainly has in his life. He's also a Capricorn sun. Capricorns are the workhorse of the zodiac. So they, are born to really identify with work, and their work is their identity, and they spend a lot of time focusing on their work. And not only is his Mars squaring Pluto, but his Sun is trining Pluto. So the Sun in Capricorn is trine the Pluto in Virgo. So that's going to bring in that element of power, that element of ability to really focus and create. That's going to blend well with his solar energy, with his Capricorn sun. So that's going to give him even more power and drive to accomplish in his life. And like I said, he certainly has, as we can see in his career. So what else is interesting about his chart? His sun sextiles Neptune in Scorpio at 4 degrees. So that brings a softness to his Capricorn sun. That brings a spirituality, maybe a sensitivity, a compassionate nature. Of course, with the sextile, they always say it's, that you have to, it's an opportunity to use that aspect of yourself, or to show that aspect of yourself. It doesn't come so easily like a trine per se, but it's there and it's available. And so that is another aspect in his chart. His sun is sextile to Neptune, and his sun also, interestingly, is in conjunct Uranus. And what I understand about the inconjuncts is that because they're not quite in opposition to each other, they're 150 degrees apart from one another, they have a difficult time seeing each other. And so you can kind of like overdo one part of the energy or the other. So my guess is that with somebody with Sun in conjunct Uranus, that Uranus wants freedom, that Uranus wants to have no attachments and just totally be independent. And his Uranus happens to be in Leo. So I could see that perhaps, this Sun in Capricorn wants to be responsible, wants to be mature, wants to be, always doing the right thing. But the Uranus in Leo is kind of like, woo, I want to do whatever I want to do and whatever suits me. That's the Leo energy. It's like wanting to really, just kind of do what it wants to fulfill itself in a sense. So perhaps some of what has gotten him into the situation a little bit is this inconjunct from his Sun to Uranus, where that Uranian part of him is just really sought that, freedom, and the freedom to really just kind of like find pleasure, that's Leo, the freedom to really just kind of like do what he wants to feel good. So I find that interesting. So moving on, I said at the beginning, he has a Aries moon no matter what time he was born, and that's going to come into play when I speak about some of the transits that's been happening. He does have a Mercury at 28 degrees Sag, conjunct very widely his Saturn at 19 degrees Sagittarius. So let's think about Mercury and Sag. Well, that's somebody who likes to communicate in a way that broadens his perspectives, broadens the perspective of others. You know, it probably made him a really good newscaster because he took an interest in, you know, other cultures and other, you know, things, whatever, ideas, you know. It's just it's a very inquiring mind, the Mercury in Sagittarius. But with Saturn there, that brings in a real practical part to his thinking nature. It's kind of like, okay, that's a really big, grand idea, but how does it really, you know, shake out when it comes to like grounding it in reality, you know, which I would say could lend to being a good newscaster, because, you know, you want to like encourage like interesting dialogue about, you know, really amazing things, but there's a practical part of you too that doesn't want to, you know, be sort of talking about things that aren't really true. Now, I also think I've read that he also kind of was given, you know, kind of he had a reputation maybe for also kind of being a tough interviewer at times. I don't know too much about that, but that would be an indication of Mercury conjunct Saturn. It would sort of be the skeptic, kind of like, you know, questioning and really wanting to make sure that what's being said is true and that kind of thing. Yet with a fairly open mind, because Mercury in Sagittarius does, you know, want to incorporate a larger understanding of the world within themselves. His Mercury sextiles Jupiter. So his Mercury in Sag sextiles Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius. Again, that's just, you know, a broad-minded person. Somebody who probably has a bit of a sense of humor about him, because that's very much Jupiter, jovial, you know, and so it maybe balances that Mercury conjunct Saturn part of him to have that Mercury sextile Jupiter in his chart as well. Then he has Mercury sextile Neptune. And this is going to just give him an ability to be empathetic, to be compassionate through his communication with other people, which I think from what I recall seeing him, you know, as a newscaster, I could say that was also part of his delivery as well. You know, there was a sensitivity about him, a compassionate part of him. So moving on, his Venus is at 14 Aquarius and it's opposed Uranus. So let's think about that. It's opposed that Uranus in Leo. So Venus in Aquarius, Venus is our loving energy. Venus is our creative self. Venus is our values. Venus is our self-worth. And to have Venus in Aquarius, it means that your self-worth and your loving nature is predicated on really wanting a sense of freedom. It could be somebody who doesn't have a typical kind of relationship, because Venus rules our relationships, but Aquarius just needs a lot of space. You know, it cannot feel confined. But what's interesting about his Venus, like I said, it opposes Uranus. But first I want to mention his Venus conjuncts Chiron exactly at 14 degrees Aquarius. And Chiron is our wound. So his wound is conjunct his loving energy, his relationship energy, his creativity, his self-worth. So there's something going on here. And the wound has to do with not feeling accepted, not feeling like you belong. You know, Aquarius is the outsider. Aquarius is the alien. Aquarius is the rebel. It's the unique, you know, person. Aquarius goes against the grain. It doesn't do what everybody else does. And that's where his wound is him feeling like he's different because of that Capricorn sun wants to be normal. Mercury conjunct Saturn wants to think normally, you know, but Venus in Aquarius, your loving nature, your creativity, your sense of self-worth is conjunct the wounded part of yourself, and the wounded part of yourself that feels like an outsider. So there's something here that is saying, you know, he doesn't necessarily, or in his life maybe hasn't necessarily felt his worth. Maybe he's felt different, and he's and has had a hard time feeling like he truly fits in. But what has happened with that opposition from both the Venus Chiron opposite the Uranus, Venus being our loving energy too, it's like with the Uranus is like freedom. So it goes back and forth between like your loving nature and trying to like figure out how to express your Venus and Aquarius energy, but it's opposed Uranus that just wants total freedom in Leo to be seen, you know? So you might go from experiencing that wounded nature, that wound around self-worth, that wound around self-value, that wound around relationships, and just feeling kind of like you don't belong somehow in them. And then bouncing back to that Uranus sort of, I want freedom, hey, you know. But then there could be times where Uranus brings that insight. And that insight would be, in Leo, would be like, you know, you need to be noble. You need to be the king, you know, that's very Leonian. So when Uranus is operating at its elevated state, it's insight, you know, into expressing oneself through the Leonian principle. So there's just something in his chart where with oppositions we go back and forth until we finally kind of start to learn how to express both of the energies positively. But at first it can be this kind of like, you know, not necessarily expressing the energy to its most elevated expression. So that's what could be have been operating in his life, where he's kind of like, it's like his wounded energy, his wounded loving nature, not figuring it out, like how to be in relationship and feel free at the same time, and then bouncing across to that Uranus, like, I want total freedom, forget it, you know, I'm just gonna do whatever I want and get the pleasure that I want, you know, and having to figure out, you know, how that works. How do you have the freedom in relationship that you want, but still have relationship, you know? That's the challenge. And what does it look like? But what does it look like in a way that isn't harmful to people? Because Uranus is about humanity, you know? So Uranus and Leo being the king of humanity, you know? So, you know, how do you make it work so that you're not devaluing others in the process? All right, so his Venus also sextiles Saturn, which just brings him some groundedness to his creative expression, to his ability to have relationship. His Venus also sextiles Mars. That's a nice blending of the male and female desire principles that you would think would support and help him in relationship. You know, and he has been in a long relationship in his life. You know, I don't know how long he's been married currently, but you know, there's potential there for him to really succeed at being in a relationship. But then there's this other part that's just kind of like, how do you have freedom at the same time? And then there's this whole controlling, you know, Mars squared Pluto stuff that we talked about that, you know, is really the crux of what's coming up for him right now. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to his transits that are happening right now. Most likely Pluto has been squaring his moon, because Pluto's in Capricorn at around 17 degrees, and that might be the degree of his moon or somewhere around there. But I believe that Pluto has been squaring his moon because moon are your habits, moon is your home, and your feminine principle within yourself. And that, what has been going on right now is definitely suggestive of some sort of deep transformation around his lunar principle, around his habits, around his home life, you know, around his own like feminine energy and how he, you know, essentially wants to relate to the feminine energy in his life. Pluto is death and transformation. Pluto is also about power and control. And if it's been squaring that moon, it could mean, you know, his emotional self has been very like intense, you know, and perhaps even being driven by compulsion. You know, that's very much Pluto. Compulsive habits, moon squared Pluto. So I believe that might be happening in his chart right now. Uranus has been trining his Mercury. This is just good for growth right now, for mental growth, for learning more about himself. So he's been having transiting Uranus opposite his Jupiter. And we didn't talk about his natal Jupiter yet, but his natal Jupiter is conjunct Neptune. In Jupiter's in Libra, 28 degrees, Neptune's in Scorpio at 4 degrees. To have Jupiter, the planet of expansion, conjunct Neptune, the planet of idealization, can mean many things. I mean, it can mean some kind of, you know, strong faith, but it could also mean sometimes when you are your philosophies or your perspectives could somehow be a little bit clouded, you know, could be a little bit unrealistic. And what's been happening is that transiting Uranus has been opposing that Jupiter. So perhaps this is part of why things are coming to the fore at this time, because Uranus is like sudden and unexpected, and it's opposed this Jupiter conjunct Neptune. And oppositions always bring in relationships with the other. So it could just mean right now, like if he's had any sort of false perspectives or false ideas about getting away with whatever he does, you know, Jupiter, Neptune, that Uranus is like totally blowing that up right now. It's like, nope, it's shifting, it's changing, you know, and it's kind of being exposed. And I would think that that's part of what's happening right now. Uranus is like waking him up and out of that fog of like, I can just, you know, do this and get away with this and it's not a problem. The other things that have been happening are Saturn has been on his Mercury. His Mercury's at 28 degrees Sagittarius. And Saturn is there, you know, just sort of sobering up the thinking a bit. Also, when Saturn moves into Capricorn next month, it will conjunct his sun. He will have Saturn on his sun, which will not have happened for 30 years. So, you know, this is a maturing time when Saturn comes across any planet. So with the sun, it's about maturing the identity. And Saturn's a lot about karma too. It's like when we've been, you know, doing things, Saturn kind of comes and sets the record straight. It doesn't allow you to, you know, get away with things. It's sort of like, it's the time where you're kind of paying back the way you've been, in a sense. So that's going to be coming up in December. And the last thing I want to mention is that Jupiter in Scorpio has been squaring that Chiron-Venus conjunction. So again, the wound around relationship and somehow the wound around feeling alienated in relationship, Jupiter in Scorpio, Jupiter expanding through looking deeply into things, has been squaring that Chiron-Venus conjunction. And that's probably another thing that's been bringing up all of these experiences right now, because Jupiter in Scorpio kind of like just wants what it wants, you know. That could be like excess sexuality, you know, squaring his loving nature and the wound around his loving nature. So that too is an interesting transit to be having for himself at this time. And I'll also mention that progressed Jupiter is now at 1 degree Scorpio in his chart. So Jupiter moving from relationships in Libra to Scorpio, transformation, you know. So just another symbol of him, you know, really being able to embrace the process of transformation at this time if he's open to it, and begin to, you know, change his ways. So this has been the chart of Matt Lauer. If you've enjoyed this reading, please subscribe to my channel. Also, I do readings. If you're interested, you can contact me at lindsayc73@gmail.com. Thanks so much for watching. Adios.